Today, I will be making a budget tier list on what are the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh right now. Not only that, I'll actually be rating your favorite budget decks on terms of playability, potential, and of course, ease of budget. My guy, my friend, my brother in Christ. I'm a broke ass Bible. Hey, yo! What the? Hey! Of course, big dog, I want to hear what you gotta say about these particular decks. And if there's something that I missed, I want you to let me know, and I'll try my best to get to you. Without further ado, let's jump on in. Bang! So for this budget tier list, I wanted to make sure that every single deck can be built for around that $100 price tag, if not cheaper. I also wanted to avoid those must-have expensive cards, especially if they're getting reprinted soon. Decks that rely on cards like Baron de Fleur were immediately excluded. With that criteria, you may know some strategies are missing, but don't worry, I plan on putting them onto my rogue tier list. Let's go ahead and start off with Abyss Actor. Technically, big dog, Abyss Actors did get stronger with the new Pendulum support. I still would say that Yu-Gi-Oh players have to act like they know this deck. This is seriously a deck that takes a really good pilot. Abyss Actors is an incredibly cheap Yu-Gi-Oh deck, but unfortunately its power stops once people understand how the deck works. I also think one of Abyss Actor's biggest problems is upgradability. Can more powerful cards make the deck stronger? Not really. I also think that Black Wings do not have that problem whatsoever. This could be my copium coping, but I think that this deck is really, really good. I talked about it on yesterday's video on budget decks that you can build for $50. Black Wings secretly has the sauce when everybody wants to activate monster effects. Black Wing the Salt Dragon is the tax main. Look, my guy, if you didn't want to be surrounded by blacks, all you had to do was say something. This deck also gets way better if you just so happen to get an SP Little Knight or a Sky Crisis from the new set. It's going to be a fairly decent Yu-Gi-Oh deck that you can play on a budget, and players are always innovating something new about Blackwing. Crystal Beast, on the other hand, yeah. It's kind of crazy because Crystal Beasts have a lot of great things going for it. The support, a lot of it's in the right direction, but the really big problem with Crystal Beast is still none of them do anything. The great Crystal Beast monsters pretty much start and end with Crystal Beast Sapphire Pegasus. This deck needs more Crystal Beast monsters that actually do things. Unfortunately, the LGBTQ deck is a real challenge, but another colorful Yu-Gi-Oh deck that I would consider a little better is Ignister. Ignister does have summoning a rival to their side of the field, which is really, really good. But a lot of players have actually been playing the White Woman Jump Scare in Underworld Goddess. I don't see it staying on the field for that long. I think Ignister is a solid investment if you're using it to play with friends, but anything past that, you might be pushing your luck with this particular deck. Dark World, my boys. Bro, I'm telling you, ever since TJ has destroyed me with Dark World, I've had a whole different light. This is the other rainbow deck with a whole bunch of darkies. It's top budget. Now, the thing about Dark World is that it does have a couple of cards that are starting to get a little bit pricey, but I think it's one of the better budget decks that you can play, and it's actually one of those decks you can play at your friends, you can play at locals, and you can even play at bigger events. It's really, really good right now. It's almost really crazy how just banning Castier or Rise Heart has made so many other strategies extremely good, and Dark World is one of them. For the people who think that glue is the best breakfast of the world, there's Outlich. Real challenge. Outlich isn't necessarily a terrible Yu-Gi-Oh deck if you and a hamster are competing for the same IQ test, but outside of being able to floodgate your opponent, this really doesn't do much. And it's kind of funny because there was a point in time where I thought Outlich was one of the strongest decks in the entire world, and how could they ever top that? They actually outdid themselves. Outlich does need more support for it to be considered viable. Though I will say, this real challenge is really fun against some of your friends. Where I'ma put the stepsisters, big boys? What's really crazy about Yu-Gi-Oh right now is that there are a ton of Yu-Gi-Oh strategies that use the graveyard, and the stepsisters, they can go ahead and dry them out. I actually think that Exosister is incredible against some of the better Yu-Gi-Oh decks in the game. Decks like Unchained and Tier Limit, this deck will give it a run for its money. But then there's other strategies that don't use the graveyard where Exosister may struggle just a little bit. Overall, its potential for upgrades are pretty decent, and I think that Exosisters will be a solid deck for some time to come. Just like how Furhire has managed to be one of the better decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Furhire actually does what Exo Sister can't do. If you're not relying on the graveyard and cards like Dimension Shifter don't affect you, well, I'm pretty sure you're reliant on attack position special summon monsters, and Furhire's Impin can take care of that. But hypothetically, if you're not reliant on any of those, more often than not, you're still reliant on using monster effects. And this deck has one of the most unfair cards in Harpy's Featherstorm to use. Easily top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Now, if you're a man of culture like me, you like Furhire. Yeah, Donner Mommer. Ironically, Furhire has been a fairly powerful Yu-Gi-Oh deck in the Master Duel and TCG players. Furry players really like this deck. I'm gonna say pretty decently good. Furhire is actually pretty good not only in Master Duel, but in the TCG. For the furry players, I would say it 100% has mad potential. I think Furhire is a solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck that you can use against your friends and even win locals with. The problem with it is when you take it to the next level of events, you're going to have to go against some really favorable matchups to get some really good positionings at high levels. I wouldn't say that Gold Pride is in the best spot right now, but it's surely not in a terrible spot. I will put this deck in mad potential, just like Furhire. It's a deck that is really good at a local level or even against your friends. We're probably going to have to wait a bit longer to see how the format shakes out in order to consider this a really good deck. One thing that I have noticed is that hand traps are pretty good, and normally when hand traps are fairly good, Gold Pride Punk is incredible because you can just draw so many cards to be able to answer what your opponent has. Infernobles, easy my guy, top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. My guy, I wish that this deck was $50. I would have been talking about it, but it's just a little bit more than that. The best thing about most of Infernobles core cards is that they've been reprinted so many times, this deck is incredibly cheap to get for the core. But depending on which route that you want to go, some of those other cards are a little bit harder to get and just slightly more expensive. But overall, no matter what route that you go with Infernoble Knight, I think it's one of the better decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And is good on all three levels, which is locals, friends, and high-level events. Also, the upgradability for this deck, holy crap. You don't have to get a Birdo on the floor, but once it gets reprinted, I would say 100% go for cards like that, and you'll make your deck so much stronger. Labyrinth just so happens to be in one of the best spots in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. It just got new support from Age of Overlord directly and indirectly. Cards like Sky Crisis and SP Little Knight definitely help, but then there's Arius the Labyrinth Butler, which is an exciting new card for the strategy. But one of the best things that I think that this deck has going for it right now is that a lot of players are focused on monster effects, where this deck is a trap-based Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. Now, I included this in the budget tier list as one of those closer to $100 budget Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, and knowing that Big Welcome Labyrinth will not be getting reprinted anytime soon. It's a solid strategy if you like trap-based Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, and you want to stop eating glue past Outledge and start eating glue with mommy milkers. I think Marine Cess is actually an incredible Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. I would put it in mad potential, and that's because there's a couple of problems with Marine Sus. First of all, you gotta say it, they're Marine Sus. You can't trust nothing that's sus. But the big thing about Marine Sus is that it is a good Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. I would recommend it for anybody that's playing in the friend group and at a local level. When you get to the bigger events, you're gonna need some of those more expensive cards because Marine Sus is a deck that does not like to go second. My guy, this deck gotta be your first sister, not your second. Holy crap, Marine Cess's Exo stepsisters in the water. There's a couple of things that I've noticed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. A lot of people are playing Bestial monsters. And Bestials are good Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. They're great Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. They destroy Mathmex. Against your friend groups, I think Mathmech would do well. Against locals, ooh. If your locals just so happen to have a couple of those kids that like to play anime duels and don't really read cards, yeah, it's playable. But if your locals have those players that ask you to tell you what phase you're going into, I ain't tried it, big dog. Nelia is also a ridiculously cheap deck. Probably the cheapest deck on this entire tier list to also go on a real challenge. I want you to refer back to the Mathmech thing. How many children are playing in your locals? Jared from Subway would like to know. If there isn't a lot of competition at your locals, then Nelia might be one of those decks suited for that type of environment. But other than that, it's not gonna do much. Ninjas, my boy. You can't just pick up ninjas, my guy. You gotta know about the Shadow Cone Kool-Aid Jutsu, the fried chicken of art signs. You gotta be able to do the sharding gun. The emphasis on gun. In essence, if you wait a ninjas in Paris, you might as well put the deck down. I think that this deck takes an incredibly good pilot. If you ask me from my personal experience, all of the upgrades that you could be using on ninjas, you could also be using on better decks. This deck is terrible against going against really good Yu-Gi-Oh boards. And also, it takes a huge brain to be able to play this deck optimally. Nouvelle, I actually do like this deck. My boy is cooking! The Rachel Ray of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Gordon Ramsay of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just like if I were to get on one of their shows, it would be a real challenge. The problem with Nouvelle is that it tributes your opponent's monsters for its card effect, meaning that your opponent can actually respond or use those cards before they are tributed. There just so happens to be another deck on here that tributes it before your opponent can use their effects, and is one of the best decks in the entire game, undisputably. When you compare those two decks, one of them's Big Cook, the other one already planted its seeds of destruction. If you know the pun, then you know the pun. Pendulums actually came a long way. I love that this deck is incredibly cheap. I'm gonna put it in really good. There are quite a few cards that you could use to upgrade your Pendulum deck, and that will help the strategy immensely. And because of the new cards in Age of Overlord, the deck can actually Pendulum summon multiple times in a turn, as well as has more accessibility to Pendulum monsters to get into your important Link monsters, which give you more opportunities to Pendulum summon from your extra deck. The only drawback for this particular strategy is that you need a whole spreadsheet to play the deck on the side of you as you play the deck. Playing Pendulum feels equivalent to building IKEA furniture. It's definitely a deck not for the faint of heart. TJ was actually telling me that both Kin and Jin can be used in Plunder, and I don't think that that's a bad idea because it does allow you to be able to draw two and then discard a Plunder. The only problem with this is that I've always known Plunder Patrol to be a normal summon reliant deck. I think that that needs to be tested out a little bit more. I would still say, even at the end of the day, Plunder Patrol is a deck that takes a really good pilot. This is a deck that I know for 100% could clear a friend group and possibly even do some damage at locals. When it comes to the higher level events, I think that the deck will struggle though. In case you were wondering what I was talking about when I meant a better tribute your opponent's deck, my young sampling, I was talking about Rika. Rika, hands down, the top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. I don't know how many more high-level events does this deck need to win for you guys to realize this deck cannot be messed with. And it's even better that some of the deck's biggest ops got absolutely crushed on the ban list. It didn't necessarily get anything from Age of Overlord, but it doesn't really need anything to be a great deck right now. Moving on next, we would be Scareclaw. My guy. My friend. I was actually shocked to even find out that Viscous Samsara was only $10. Boys, it should be a crime how cheap that card is. This deck, really good. The new card in Age of Overlord, Viscous Samsara, is a one-card combo to make so many different inboards for so many different decks. This is one of them. My only beef with Scareclaw is that these Scareclaw monsters themselves don't necessarily do anything unless you've already accomplished a board, but this deck has so many crazy cool iterations and versions and ways to play it. It is a top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck with a vast amount of potential and so much upgrade options. I would not be surprised if this deck topped or even won a regional very soon. I still would say that the jury isn't out on Red Dragon Archfiend. This deck is kind of still crazy good. For the amount of money that you spend for this deck, which is $30, it's almost completely cracked on how good this deck can still be. 100% a locals contender. Your boy Black Atlas and Red Dragon don't like to play no games. We like to do things very quickly and end games relatively short. I feel like you've been told that, but in the derogatory term. And it's okay. You can be quick. Be Black Atlas. Sharks have the biggest glow up in Age of Overlord, and I don't even think it's close. This deck is a strategy that I would typically put in the real challenge, but I think it has mad potential because of some of the new cards. The new monster in Exceed Armor Fortress is what really does it for me. It allows you to search any Exceed Armor card. Now granted, we only got one you can search, so don't get too feisty with me. But the fact that Konami is actually willing to break boundaries to give Sharks even more support that isn't on script, I think it's enough. To be honest, I think Sharks are already really good on a local level, and it only has one card that's Exceed Armor support. Wait till it gets more cards to make the deck even stronger. TJs find themselves on this tier list even though I made this video on pre-order. In case you didn't know, pre-order prices are way overpriced. The most expensive TG card is a secret rare, and it's $5 in the new set. Yeah, The biggest problem with TGs, in my opinion, is that it is just a fake Synchron deck. And I know people just don't want to hear that, but even at my premiere, players were trying to get rid of their TG cards because they realized that the monsters aren't great and the new cards don't really do enough. The best thing that this deck is good at is making Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity, which I can tell you a couple of decks that can do it better. Therions, you won't believe where I put the Theory Boys. Now, there is one slight problem with Therions right now. I think that this is probably more reserved for the Rogue tier list, and it's mainly because one of the Horus cards, I'm Seti, is kind of expensive, and it seems like you need 3. But outside of that, the entire deck, nah, I'm coping. This shouldn't even be here. Without spilling the beans, Therion as a pure deck without all of the cards that make it extremely powerful, real challenge, big dog. This deck is just fatally flawed, but when you mix it with Horus and some other cards, oh my god, it is incredible. It's probably one of the better decks in the entire game. But as far for budget players, I can't even fathom a way to make that deck at that $100 mark. So I would say that this is a complete mistake, and if we just regard it as pure Therion, it's not a good deck. Tistina. The only thing Tistina is testing is tits on the Tina. Tistina is the prime example of Konami telling us they're going to take us to Disneyland, only to find out that Disneyland was just a trip to the dentist. Out of all the fan bases, I would say Traptrix is the oddest because for some reason they called Traptrix waifus. There's like so many things wrong with that. 1, the Traptrix look like they're 13 at best. 2, that's not even what the Traptrix really is. You understand it's an insect or plant, right? 3, that's almost like the purpose of Traptrix. They lure you in because the real monster is a monster. It's a monster. But hey, man, if you in love with spiders, I really ain't got no much to say to you. I think it takes a good pilot. I think Traptrix, like Dark World, is one of those extremely solid structure decks that you can buy and do some real damage with. It's definitely a deck that's really good against your friend group and just as good as locals. You just have to know exactly what you're doing with this deck because one fatal mistake, you're probably game over. And to be honest with you, there are probably better trap Yu-Gi-Oh decks that you could be playing. Looking at you, Labyrinth, for more success. I was convinced to put Earth Machine on here. Why? Earth Machine is a crazy Yu-Gi-Oh deck. You probably thought I was gonna say crazy good. No, it's crazy. I remember back in the days playing Earth Machine, doing all that stuff to draw due cards. Now you can get the exact or even better success just playing other Yu-Gi-Oh decks or resolving a card called Pot of Extravagance. Earth Machine is definitely for those hardcore Yu-Gi-Oh players, maybe even construction workers that play on their lunch break, but I would not recommend unless you are in your friend group and you guys are playing like you can only play type decks or something like that. Like, I don't know. And that's all that I have for the placings on my budget tier list. I think that this is incredibly accurate. My guy, if you don't like where I put Therions, in actuality, my boy, when you get everything, is probably right here. But I'm gonna keep it right here. Of course, big dog, if you like the content, the only thing I want is your undying loyalty and for you to click on another video. I hope you're having an amazing day. And if you ain't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day.